All morning, we've been talking about Super Tuesday. People in 14 states today and a U.S. territory will vote, and it could be a defining day in the Democratic presidential race. The remaining candidates, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Mike Bloomberg, and Tulsi Gabbard, are going after more than 1,300 convention delegates. That, as we've been saying all morning, is more than a third of all the regular delegates who will help decide the party's nominee in July in Milwaukee. Voters are already lining up at polling stations this morning. This one's in Charlottesville, Virginia. Joining us now to chew it all over, Valerie Jarrett, former senior advisor to President Obama, and CBS News political contributor Jamal Simmons. They're going to talk about what's at stake today. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
While you're chewing.
Wow.
I like that.
We are chewing away.
Chew it all over.
Let's chew it over.
Yeah.
So, Valerie, let's start with you. I mean, what's your reaction to this triple endorsement that Joe Biden picked up overnight?
Huge shot in the arm. He had a great victory in South Carolina. I think to have his opponents so quickly line up behind him is a great sense of momentum that he has going into Super Tuesday. But I'll tell you what I think. I think that whoever emerges tonight, particularly if it's Bernie Sanders, if it's Vice President Biden, or even if it's Mayor Bloomberg, what I would do is break with conventional wisdom and announce a running mate that's a woman of color. No, not tonight. Maybe before, certainly before the next primary.
Yeah, interesting.
Woman, person of color, someone who reflects the diversity of our party. And yeah, that's not usual. That's not what they normally do. But these are not normal times. And I think it would send a very important signal going into the next round of primaries to do so with a running mate.
You see a team of rivals, perhaps?
I think a team that builds a big tent. That's one of the strengths of our party. And I think what we know is that you can't just win on a narrow base. And so I would look at ways of building a broader tent with an eye towards the general election. The reason why Barack Obama won not once but twice, he had progressives, moderates, independents, and some Republicans, and that's what we're going to need in the general election.
It's interesting you say that because Tom Friedman had a great article in the New York Times recently where he said that very thing. Pick a team of rivals, and you could go to victory. I thought it was it's a really good read. Jamal, let's talk about Mayor Bloomberg tonight.
Sure.
Because he's put really all his eggs in the basket for this thing tonight. What needs to happen for him? If he doesn't do well, what happens?
He's got to win delegates. I mean, like you said, he put in over $400 million. He can't come out of that with goose eggs. So he's got to find a way to win some delegates to prove to people that money was well spent.
And
he needs a lot of delegates.
But very few people are talking about him now.
Has he got to win states? Does he have to win states?
I'm not convinced he has to win a state. But second place works. You know, again, this is a delegate fight. So he's got to have enough delegates that he's a credible candidate for the White House. And if he's not really winning enough delegates, what's he doing?
Is he still in it in your mind? Because it seems everyone's talking about Bernie and Biden. Is Bloomberg still in it?
No, the rationale for the Bloomberg campaign was that Joe Biden would be falling apart by this point and it wouldn't be working. That's not happening. Joe Biden's getting stronger. He seems to be growing. So the question now becomes whether or not we ought to have a Mike Bloomberg still there in this campaign. And a lot of Democrats are struggling here. Joe Biden has had a line he's been using about Democrats want a real Democrat, a proud Democrat that's running for president to represent the party. There are people who do want that. And on the other hand, you've got Bernie Sanders, who's running a campaign that seems to be fighting not just the Republicans, but also the traditional Democratic Party. Elected officials, you know, a lot of the Bernie bros online have been going after African Americans in South Carolina. Ava DuVernay even had, took on some water from some of this crowd. Bernie Sanders has to decide, is he more interested in beating Donald Trump or more interested in beating the traditional Democratic Party?
He's leading in Texas and California. In California, substantially. Two biggest states, almost half the delegates today. What do you think is going to happen there?
Oh, I would expect Bernie Sanders to get to win California. Again, let's pay attention to the margins. Is he growing his population? Is he bringing in these new voters that he's been talking about and growing that number? Also, is he winning over some of these traditional Democrats where he's invited last night? This is a good line. He invited in Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg's campaign supporters to come and join him. If that's happening, then you'll see Bernie Sanders grow his coalition, and that's the path to victory, not fighting traditional Democrats.
But Valerie, we have to pay attention to Bernie Sanders supporters, do we not? Because they are speaking very loudly.
Not only are they loud, but they vote, they turn out, they have a lot of energy. And so, yes, I think, but that's kind of my point. We need a big tent. We can't leave anybody behind if we actually want to win in November. And that's the eye on the prize. I think that's where Mayor Bloomberg, that's why he got in the race. He was worried about President Trump. He was worried, was there somebody viable in the field? And so I think all of them are going to eventually pull ranks and focus on how to build a big tent so that we can win in November.
Elizabeth Warren, Valerie, do you think there's a path still for her?
I wouldn't write her out. Look, the last time I was here, everybody was discounting Vice President Biden. So she is a force of nature. She's a good campaigner. She's a strong candidate. It's important that she have a good night tonight.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Come back and chew anytime. This story has many legs. Valerie Jarrett and Jamal Simmons, always welcome.